Death is not the greatest loss in life. The greatest loss is what dies inside us while we live. Shi Heng Yi. Have you ever wondered if your body whispers secrets about your remaining time on Earth? What if understanding these subtle signals could help you and your loved ones prepare for life's final chapter with dignity and peace? In the journey of life, our bodies communicate with us constantly. As we age, these signals become especially significant, sometimes indicating that our earthly journey may be approaching its conclusion. Today, we explore 8 critical signs that medical professionals and traditional wisdom recognize as indicators of life's final transition. This knowledge isn't meant to frighten, but to empower, providing understanding that can lead to better care, meaningful conversations, and purposeful final days. Join us as we explore these important signals with compassion and clarity. Number 1. Significant changes in sleep patterns. Sleep, that mysterious state where we spend nearly a third of our lives, becomes a powerful messenger as we approach life's end. Throughout human history, changes in sleep have been observed as harbingers of major life transitions. Ancient Chinese medicine, which informs much of Shi Heng Yi's philosophy, views sleep as a window into our vital energy, or qi. When this energy begins its final shift, sleep patterns often transform dramatically. For seniors approaching the end of life, sleep disturbances typically manifest in 2 distinct ways. Some experience hypersomnia, sleeping far more than usual, sometimes up to 20 hours daily. This increased sleep reflects the body's diminishing energy reserves and its need to conserve strength. The individual may become increasingly difficult to rouse, and periods of wakefulness grow shorter and less frequent. Conversely, others develop severe insomnia, finding themselves awake during odd hours, unable to achieve restful sleep despite profound fatigue. This paradoxical wakefulness often occurs as the body's regulatory systems begin to malfunction. The internal clock that has faithfully governed sleep cycles for decades begins to wind down, creating erratic patterns that defy normal schedules. Medical research confirms these observations. Studies of hospice patients reveal that altered sleep patterns frequently emerge approximately 3 months before death, intensifying in the final weeks. The brain's sleep centers, particularly the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus, undergo changes that disrupt circadian rhythms. Melatonin production becomes irregular, and the delicate dance between sleep-promoting and wake-promoting neurotransmitters falls out of step. Family members often report their loved ones experiencing unusual dreams or speaking of visits from deceased relatives during brief periods of wakefulness. While science cannot fully explain these experiences, they appear with remarkable consistency across cultures and throughout history. Shi Heng Yi's teachings acknowledge these phenomena as part of the spiritual transition that accompanies physical decline. For caregivers, these sleep changes present significant challenges. The person may reverse day and night entirely, becoming most alert during pre-dawn hours when the household is asleep. They might drift between sleep and wakefulness unpredictably, making scheduling medications or meals particularly difficult. The quality of sleep typically diminishes as well, with less time spent in restorative deep sleep and REM cycles. What makes these sleep changes particularly significant is their persistence and progression. While occasional sleep disturbances are common at any age, end-of-life sleep changes typically worsen over time rather than resolving. They don't respond well to conventional sleep remedies and often coincide with other symptoms we'll discuss later. If you notice a senior loved one experiencing dramatic sleep changes, sleeping through most of the day and night, or conversely, developing stubborn insomnia, coupled with daytime drowsiness. Consider consulting healthcare providers specialized in geriatric or palliative care. While not definitively indicating imminent death, these changes warrant attention and compassionate support. Adjusting care routines to accommodate these new patterns rather than fighting against them often provides the most comfort. Number 2. Unexpected weight loss. Among the most visible signals of approaching life's end is unexpected and progressive weight loss. This isn't the intentional slimming down that comes from diet and exercise. Rather, it's an involuntary shedding of pounds that continues despite efforts to maintain weight. Medical professionals call this cachexia, or wasting syndrome, and it's been recognized as a hallmark of terminal decline across numerous medical traditions. In traditional Eastern wisdom, which forms the foundation of Shi Heng Yi's teachings, this weight loss represents the body slowly releasing its attachment to physical form. The body begins prioritizing essential functions over maintenance of muscle mass and fat stores. This ancient understanding aligns remarkably well with modern medical science, which recognizes that end-of-life metabolic changes fundamentally alter how the body processes nutrients. What makes this weight loss particularly significant is its persistence, even when caloric intake remains adequate. The body enters a catabolic state, breaking down its own tissues to meet energy needs. This process typically begins with muscle tissue, creating the characteristic frail appearance often associated with advanced age and illness. The face may appear more angular as fat pads diminish, hands become thinner with more prominent veins, and clothes hang loosely on frames that once filled them completely. Several biological mechanisms drive this process. The body often reduces production of appetite-stimulating hormones like ghrelin, while increasing inflammatory compounds that suppress hunger. Absorption of nutrients in the digestive tract becomes less efficient. Even more significantly, the body's metabolic priority shifts away from building and maintaining tissues towards supporting only the most critical life functions. For family members, this weight loss can be deeply distressing. Many associate providing food with providing care, and watching a loved one become increasingly thin, despite offering favorite dishes, can feel like failure. Cultural associations between plumpness and health make this symptom particularly alarming in many communities. However, understanding that this weight loss reflects natural, metabolic changes rather than insufficient care can bring some comfort. Studies tracking end-of-life weight patterns show that significant unintentional weight loss, typically defined as losing 10% or more of body weight over 6 months without trying, occurs in approximately 80% of people in their final year of life. This pattern appears most pronounced in those with conditions like advanced cancer, congestive heart failure, and chronic respiratory diseases, but occurs even in those experiencing primarily the effects of advanced age. What differentiates concerning weight loss from normal fluctuations is its progressive nature. The decline typically doesn't plateau, but continues steadily. Simple activities require disproportionate energy, further accelerating weight loss. Even the work of breathing and maintaining body temperature burns calories that aren't adequately replaced through eating. When this symptom appears, medical evaluation is essential. While weight loss can indicate approaching end of life, it sometimes stems from treatable conditions like depression, dental problems, medication side effects, or thyroid disorders. A comprehensive assessment can identify whether interventions might help or whether this represents a natural part of the dying process. For those supporting someone experiencing this change, focusing on quality rather than quantity of nutrition often provides the most comfort. Small portions of favorite foods, served in an appealing manner without pressure to finish, honor both nutritional needs and dignity. Understanding that declining weight doesn't necessarily mean suffering and may actually reduce discomfort as the body naturally prepares for transition can help transform anxiety into acceptance. Before we continue with the next part of the video, we have a quick request. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we really appreciate it. Also, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you noticed any of these signs in elderly loved ones? How did you respond to these changes? Share your thoughts with us below, and let's start a conversation. Now, let's dive back into the content. Number 3. Declining interest in food and drink. Closely related to weight loss, yet distinct in its manifestation, is a profound diminishing of interest in eating and drinking. This shift goes beyond simple loss of appetite. It represents a fundamental change in the relationship with sustenance. Where once meals provided pleasure and social connection, they may become uninteresting or even burdensome tasks. This transition often deeply concerns family members, for whom providing nourishment represents an essential expression of care and love. Throughout human history, declining interest in food has been recognized as a significant indicator of approaching death. In Buddhist traditions that influence Shi Heng Yi's teachings, this detachment from physical nourishment represents the beginning of releasing worldly attachments. Physiologically, this change makes perfect sense. As the body begins its final transition, it gradually shuts down systems that are not immediately essential, including the complex hormonal and neurological networks that drive hunger and thirst. The process typically begins subtly. Favorite foods no longer appeal. Meal portions grow smaller. The individual might show initial interest in eating, but tire after just a few bites. Sweet flavors often remain appealing longest, as evolutionary taste preferences favor high-energy foods, even as overall appetite diminishes. Texture becomes increasingly important, as swallowing difficulties may develop, making soft foods easier to manage than those requiring significant chewing. More revealing than the reduction in food consumption is the emotional shift around eating. The social aspects of sharing meals, once a highlight of daily routine, may no longer motivate participation. Mealtimes, which previously structured the day, lose their significance. Gentle encouragement to eat might be met with indifference, rather than the expected desire to please loved ones. This represents not stubbornness, but a natural withdrawal from physical needs as the body prepares for transition. Thirst similarly diminishes, though often more gradually than hunger. The body's internal regulation of hydration, maintained faithfully throughout decades of life, begins to change. The sensation of thirst, which has reliably guided fluid intake since infancy, becomes muted or absent entirely. Medical research confirms that this reduction in thirst sensation stems from changes in the hypothalamus, the brain region responsible for maintaining bodily equilibrium, as well as alterations in hormone signaling that normally triggers thirst. For caregivers, these changes present profound emotional and ethical challenges. Cultural associations between providing food and demonstrating care run deep. Many traditions equate feeding others with love itself. When a senior refuses nourishment, family members often experience this as personal rejection or feel they're failing in their caregiving duties. Understanding that this represents a natural biological process rather than neglect can provide significant emotional relief. Medical evidence confirms that forced feeding rarely benefits those approaching life's end. Studies in hospice settings demonstrate that artificial nutrition through feeding tubes typically doesn't extend life and may increase discomfort for those in the natural dying process. The body, in its ancient wisdom, reduces intake as metabolic needs diminish. Fighting against this natural process often causes more distress than allowing it to unfold. Instead of focusing on quantity of intake, palliative care experts recommend emphasizing quality and comfort. Small tastes of favorite foods, without pressure to consume more, honor both biological reality and personal dignity. Mouth care becomes increasingly important as fluid intake decreases, with small sips of water or ice chips providing comfort, even when full drinks aren't desired. Lip balm, mouth moisturizers, and gentle oral care help manage the discomfort of dry mouth that may develop. For family members witnessing this change, reframing their understanding of care can transform the experience. Rather than measuring love through calories consumed, they can express devotion through presence, gentle touch, soothing words, and creating a peaceful environment. This shift in perspective honors both the physical reality of the dying process and the emotional needs of all involved. Number 4. Withdrawal from social activities. One of the most poignant signs that a senior may be approaching life's end is a gradual but persistent withdrawal from social engagement. This isn't simply the reduced socializing that sometimes accompanies normal aging. Rather, it represents a fundamental shift in how the individual relates to the world around them. This withdrawal often begins subtly, declining invitations that would have previously been accepted, shortening phone conversations, showing less interest in family news or community events. Throughout human history and across diverse spiritual traditions, this social withdrawal has been recognized as a natural part of life's final transition. Shi Heng Yi's teachings acknowledge this as turning inward, a necessary process of reflection and preparation. From a psychological perspective, this withdrawal represents what gerontologists call life review, an introspective process where attention naturally shifts from external activities to internal contemplation of one's life journey, relationships, and legacy. The nature of this withdrawal typically differs from social isolation caused by depression, though depression can certainly occur during end of life. Rather than feeling lonely, despite wanting connection, those approaching death often report a genuine diminishing of interest in social engagement. Conversations may shift from everyday top-out aches toward deeper reflections or expressions of love and appreciation. The individual might speak less, but listen more intently, or alternate between periods of engagement and quiet withdrawal. Neurologically, this change reflects shifts in the brain's priorities and energy allocation. The considerable cognitive resources required for social interaction, reading facial expressions, tracking conversations, responding appropriately, become increasingly precious as overall energy diminishes. The brain naturally redirects these resources toward internal processes and maintaining essential functions rather than social engagement. Family members often find this withdrawal particularly challenging. They may interpret decreased interaction as rejection or believe their loved one is giving up. In reality, this represents not surrender but transition, a natural refocusing of limited energy. Some seniors become more selective about visitors, preferring the company of just one or two close family members rather than larger gatherings. Others may engage briefly before tiring quickly, needing to retreat to solitude to replenish their energy. The timing of this withdrawal varies considerably. For some, it begins months before death, progressing gradually as other physical symptoms emerge. For others, it intensifies primarily in the final weeks. The pattern often includes periods of unexpected reconnection, brief windows of engagement and clarity that alternate with longer stretches of withdrawal. These temporary rallies can give family members false hope of improvement, making the subsequent withdrawal even more difficult to accept. Cultural context significantly influences how this withdrawal manifests and how families interpret it. In societies that value independence and social engagement, withdrawal may be resisted more strongly by both the individual and their family. Conversely, traditions that explicitly recognize life stages and honor the transition to death may provide frameworks that make this withdrawal more acceptable and meaningful. For those supporting a senior through this change, creating a balance between respect for increasing solitude and continued gentle opportunities for connection provides the greatest comfort. Rather than insisting on previous levels of interaction, adjusting expectations to match current capacity allows the relationship to continue evolving meaningfully. Sitting quietly together, gentle physical touch, reading aloud, or simply being present in the room becomes more valuable than extended conversation. Understanding this withdrawal as purposeful rather than problematic transforms how we respond to it. Rather than trying to reverse the process through stimulation or increased socialization, supporting this natural inward journey acknowledges the wisdom of both ancient traditions and modern palliative care. By honoring this shift, family members create space for important emotional and spiritual work that often characterizes life's final chapter. Number 5. Increased weakness and fatigue. Perhaps no sign of approaching life's end is more universal than the profound fatigue and weakness that gradually overtakes the body. This isn't the normal tiredness that comes after exertion or insufficient sleep. Rather, it represents a fundamental depletion of vital energy that persists regardless of rest. In traditional Eastern philosophy, which informs Shi Heng Yi's teachings, this represents the natural diminishing of qi, or life force, the essential energy that animates all living beings. When this energy begins its final ebbing, even the simplest activities become increasingly difficult. The progression of this fatigue follows a recognizable pattern. Activities that once required little thought, dressing, bathing, preparing simple meals, gradually demand more effort. The individual might need to rest between small tasks, taking breaks during activities that previously would have been completed in effort. A short walk from bedroom to kitchen might require a rest midway. Even conversation, which demands cognitive energy, may become tiring, leading to shorter interactions or delayed responses. Physiologically, multiple systems contribute to this increasing weakness. Cellular energy production becomes less efficient as mitochondria, the power plants within cells, function less optimally. Oxygen delivery diminishes as the heart and lungs work less effectively. Muscle fibers gradually atrophy, particularly in the legs and core, reducing physical strength. The nervous system transmits signals less efficiently, making movement more challenging. Collectively, these changes create a progressive fatigue that sleep cannot remedy. This fatigue typically follows a pattern medical professionals call the trajectory of decline. Rather than steady deterioration, most experience a series of steps, periods of relatively stable energy, followed by noticeable drops, then another plateau, followed by another decline. Each plateau tends to establish a new normal, with reduced capacity compared to the previous level. Over months, This stair-step pattern leads to significantly diminished function, though the rate varies considerably between individuals. For family members, witnessing this increasing weakness creates profound challenges. The person they've known as capable and independent gradually requires more assistance with basic activities. Role reversals often occur, with adult children helping parents with tasks that parents once performed for them as children. This transition can be emotionally difficult for everyone involved, challenging identities and relationship dynamics established over decades. Cultural attitudes toward dependency significantly influence how this fatigue is experienced. In societies that highly value independence and productivity, increasing weakness may trigger shame or frustration. Conversely, traditions that honor the cyclical nature of life, recognizing dependence as both the beginning and end of the human journey, often provide frameworks that make this transition more acceptable. Shi Heng Yi's philosophical approach embraces this cyclical understanding, viewing dependency not as failure, but as a natural stage of human experience. Medical research confirms the universality of this fatigue. Studies tracking symptom prevalence in the final year of life consistently identify fatigue as the most common experience, present in over 90% of individuals, regardless of underlying condition. This fatigue proves largely resistant to medical intervention, representing not a treatable symptom, but a fundamental aspect of the dying process. The timing and progression of weakness provide important clues about approaching death. When formerly mobile individuals become predominantly bedbound, research indicates median survival typically ranges from weeks to months. When fatigue progresses to the point where even turning in bed or lifting the head becomes difficult, life expectancy often shortens to days or weeks. For caregivers, responding effectively to increasing weakness requires balancing assistance with dignity. Helping too much may reinforce helplessness, while providing too little support risks exhaustion and potential injury. The optimal approach typically involves collaborating with the individual, letting them set the pace and determine which activities remain most meaningful, then providing just enough assistance to make those activities possible. Practical adaptations become increasingly important as weakness progresses. Rearranging living spaces to minimize necessary movement, providing assistive devices like walkers or bedside commodes, and scheduling activities during peak energy periods can maximize remaining independence. Equally important is normalizing rest periods and creating environments where relaxation isn't viewed as laziness, but as necessary self-care. Perhaps most significantly, this progressive weakness creates opportunities for meaningful role transitions within families. As physical abilities diminish, the senior's role may shift toward sharing wisdom, family stories, or simply receiving care with grace, teaching younger generations about accepting both the beginning and conclusion of life with dignity and equanimity. Number 6. Changes in breathing patterns. Among the most reliable indicators that death approaches are distinctive changes in breathing patterns. These respiratory alterations have been observed throughout human history, appearing with remarkable consistency across cultures and conditions. In traditional Eastern medicine, breath represents the most visible manifestation of life energy, the bridge between body and spirit. As this connection prepares to dissolve, breathing naturally transforms in predictable ways. The progression typically begins subtly. Regular breathing patterns may become slightly irregular, with occasional deeper or shallower breaths interrupting the normal rhythm. The person might sigh more frequently or pause briefly between breaths. These early changes often go unnoticed by casual observers, but represent the beginning of the respiratory system's gradual deregulation. As weeks progress, more noticeable patterns emerge. Breathing may become shallower overall, using primarily the upper chest rather than the diaphragm. Periods of rapid breathing might alternate with slower breaths or brief pauses. These fluctuations reflect changing oxygen needs as the body's systems function less efficiently, along with neurological changes affecting the brainstem's respiratory control centers. In the final days to weeks of life, distinctive breathing patterns often emerge that have been recognized by medical professionals for centuries. Cheney-Stokes respiration, characterized by rhythmic cycles of deeper, faster breathing, followed by periods of no breathing at all, frequently appears. These apneic pauses may last 10 to 30 seconds before breathing resumes, creating a roller coaster pattern that family members often find alarming. Medical science understands this as the result of diminishing sensitivity in the respiratory center to carbon dioxide levels in the blood, creating delayed response to the normal triggers for breathing. Another common pattern is the death rattle, a distinctive bubbling or gurgling sound during breathing. Despite its ominous name, this sound results from something relatively simple: diminished ability to clear normal secretions from the throat and airways due to weakened cough reflex and swallowing mechanisms. While distressing for families to hear, this rarely causes discomfort to the individual, who typically has diminished awareness at this stage. Breathing changes often correlate with other symptoms. Periods of irregular breathing frequently coincide with decreased consciousness. The breathing pattern may normalize briefly during moments of heightened awareness, then return to irregular rhythms as consciousness fades again. This relationship between breathing and awareness has been noted in texts from ancient Chinese medicine through modern palliative care manuals. From a physiological perspective, these respiratory changes reflect complex interactions between multiple failing systems. The lungs themselves may function less efficiently due to accumulated fluid or diminished elastic recoil. The respiratory muscles weaken, making each breath require more effort. Neurological control becomes less precise as the brainstem's regulatory centers function less optimally. Heart function affects oxygen delivery, creating a feedback loop where breathing must adjust to compensate for circulatory changes. For family members, these breathing alterations often prove particularly distressing. The rhythm of breath has signified life itself since our first moments. Parents anxiously awaiting a newborn's first cry, watching children sleep by monitoring the rise and fall of their chest. When this fundamental pattern changes, it signals on a primal level that life itself is changing. The irregular pauses may trigger panic in observers who fear each cessation might be permanent. Medical research provides important context for understanding these changes. Studies tracking breathing patterns in hospice settings indicate that distinctive respiratory changes appear in approximately 70% of individuals in their final days. The appearance of Cheney-Stokes breathing specifically has been associated with median survival of days to weeks in most studies, though individual variation remains significant. Healthcare providers can offer several interventions that provide comfort without disrupting the natural process. Gentle repositioning can sometimes ease breathing difficulties. Small doses of medications like morphine can reduce the sensation of air hunger without hastening death. Humidified air may ease dryness, while suctioning is generally avoided as it typically causes more distress than relief. For family members, understanding these changes as natural rather than requiring emergency intervention provides significant comfort. recognizing that irregular breathing rarely indicates suffering, and that excessive medical intervention often increases distress rather than relieving it, helps families make peace with the unfolding process. As Shi Heng Yi's teachings suggest, observing the breath with acceptance rather than resistance honors the wisdom of the body's natural transitions. Number 7. Mental confusion or altered consciousness. As life approaches its conclusion, changes in consciousness and cognitive function often emerge as significant indicators of the transition process. These alterations in mental status differ from normal aging or even conditions like dementia, representing instead a fundamental shift in how the brain functions as it prepares for life's final transition. Throughout human history, these changes in consciousness have been observed and interpreted through various cultural and spiritual frameworks. The progression typically begins subtly. The individual may experience occasional disorientation, particularly upon waking or during nighttime hours. They might momentarily confuse past and present, speaking of long-deceased family members as if they were still alive, or referencing events from decades ago as though they happened recently. Attention span often shortens, with conversations drifting or thoughts remaining incomplete. These early changes might be dismissed as normal aging or attributed to medication effects, but they frequently represent the beginning of end-of-life cognitive transitions. As weeks progress, more significant alterations emerge. Periods of confusion alternate with moments of complete clarity, what healthcare providers sometimes call terminal lucidity. During these clear windows, the person may engage in meaningful conversations, express important thoughts, or even seem temporarily stronger. These lucid intervals often give family members hope for improvement, making subsequent decline more difficult to accept. Understanding these fluctuations as a normal part of the dying process, rather than signs of recovery, can help prepare families emotionally. In traditional Eastern philosophy that informs Shi Heng Yi's teachings, these consciousness changes represent the gradual loosening of attachment between spirit and physical form. The person begins existing simultaneously in multiple realities, sometimes fully present in the physical world, sometimes partially elsewhere. This transition isn't viewed as deterioration, but as a necessary process of preparation for whatever lies beyond physical existence. From a physiological perspective, multiple factors contribute to these consciousness changes. Reduced oxygen delivery to the brain as circulation becomes less efficient affects cognitive function. Metabolic imbalances occur as the liver and kidneys process toxins less effectively. The blood-brain barrier may become more permeable, allowing substances that normally remain in circulation to affect neural function. Neurochemical changes alter neurotransmitter balance, affecting mood, perception, and thought processes. One distinctive feature of end-of-life confusion is the frequent reporting of visions or visitations. Between 50,000 to 60% of individuals approaching death report seeing deceased loved ones, spiritual figures, or glimpses of another reality. Western medicine has traditionally dismissed these experiences as hallucinations caused by oxygen deprivation or medication effects. However, their consistency across cultures, conditions, and medication states has led to greater recognition of their potential significance in the dying process. Particularly noteworthy is the emotional quality of these experiences. Unlike confusional states caused by delirium or medication toxicity, which often generate fear or agitation, end-of-life visions typically bring comfort and peace. The individual rarely finds these experiences distressing, even when observers might worry about their meaning. Family members who validate rather than contradict these experiences often strengthen connection during final days. Communication naturally transforms during this period. Conversation may become more symbolic than literal, with metaphorical language increasing. Some individuals speak of preparing for journeys, arranging transportation, or needing to complete tasks before departure. Others may address invisible presences in the room, or hold conversations with those no one else can see. Rather than indicators of pathology, these communications often represent the mind's way of processing the approaching transition. For caregivers, these consciousness changes present significant challenges. Care routines become difficult to maintain when the recipient alternates between clarity and confusion. Safety concerns increase as judgment becomes impaired. Family members may grieve the loss of meaningful communication even before physical death occurs. Finding new ways to connect through touch, music, familiar scents, or simply quiet presence becomes increasingly important. Medical literature confirms the prevalence of these changes, with studies indicating that approximately 85% of individuals experience some degree of consciousness alteration in their final weeks of life. The timing and progression of these changes provide important clues about prognosis, with increasing periods of unresponsiveness typically indicating that death may occur within days to weeks. Supporting someone through these transitions requires flexibility and presence. Rather than correcting misperceptions or reorienting to reality, companions can meet the person where they are, engaging with their current experience compassionately. Simple validation statements like, "That sounds important to you," or "Tell me more about what you're seeing," maintain connection without contradiction. Perhaps most importantly, these consciousness changes invite those accompanying the dying person to expand their own conception of reality. By acknowledging the limitations of our understanding and remaining open to the mystery of consciousness transition, we honor both scientific understanding and spiritual possibilities during life's final threshold. Number 8. Acceptance and spiritual readiness. The final and perhaps most profound indicator that life approaches its conclusion isn't physical, but psychological and spiritual. A distinctive shift toward acceptance and readiness for the transition ahead. This change in perspective has been recognized across cultures and throughout human history, appearing with remarkable consistency in the final weeks or months of life. In the traditions that inform Shi Heng Yi's teachings, this acceptance represents the culmination of spiritual development, the ability to embrace the natural cycle of existence without resistance. The manifestation of this acceptance varies considerably based on individual personality, cultural background, and spiritual beliefs. Some express it directly, making statements about being ready to go or feeling their work in this life is complete. Others demonstrate it through actions, giving away cherished possessions, making final arrangements, or resolving long-standing relationships. Still others show it more subtly through a qualitative shift in demeanor, a newfound serenity, reduced anxiety about the future, or decreased interest in medical interventions. This readiness typically develops gradually, rather than appearing suddenly. The individual often progresses through recognizable emotional stages, first identified by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally, acceptance. However, these stages rarely unfold in linear fashion. Most people cycle through them repeatedly, spending increasing time in acceptance as death approaches. Even those who reach profound acceptance may still experience occasional moments of grief or fear about leaving loved ones behind. From a psychological perspective, this acceptance reflects the completion of important emotional work. Unresolved relationships often demand attention, with many feeling a need to express forgiveness, seek reconciliation, or simply say proper goodbyes. Life review becomes increasingly important, assessing one's journey, acknowledging both accomplishments and regrets, and finding meaning in the life lived. This process allows integration of the full life experience, rather than focusing solely on current limitations. Spiritually, this readiness often manifests as deepening connection with one's existing faith tradition, or as openness to spiritual dimensions previously unexplored. Those with established religious beliefs may find greater comfort in familiar rituals and teachings. Others might develop new interest in questions of meaning, purpose, and what might exist beyond physical life. Many report increased experiences of transcendence, moments of connection with something larger than themselves that provide comfort and reduce fear of the unknown. For family members, recognizing and supporting this acceptance presents complex emotional challenges. Loved ones may interpret statements about readiness for death as giving up, rather than as healthy preparation. Those not yet ready to say goodbye might unconsciously discourage expressions of acceptance, changing the subject when end-of-life topics arise, or insisting on focusing only on recovery. Learning to honor the dying person's emotional and spiritual journey, even when it differs from one's own readiness, represents important emotional work for families. Cross-cultural perspectives provide valuable insights into this acceptance process. Some traditions explicitly prepare people for death throughout life, rather than addressing it only when illness appears. In certain Buddhist practices, regular meditation on mortality develops familiarity with life's impermanence. Some Native American traditions honor elders' wisdom about approaching death rather than denying their insights. These cultural frameworks often facilitate smoother transitions than approaches that treat death as a taboo subject. Medical literature confirms the significance of this acceptance. Studies of hospice patients indicate that those who achieve psychological and spiritual preparation often experience more peaceful deaths, with less anxiety and physical distress. This correlation appears consistent across different faith traditions, and even among those identifying as secular or non-religious, suggesting that finding meaning in mortality represents a universal human need rather than specifically religious concern. The timing of this acceptance varies considerably. Some individuals achieve it months before physical decline becomes apparent, almost as if the spirit recognizes the approaching transition before the body shows signs. Others reach acceptance only in their final days. Some alternate between acceptance and struggle until the very end. Each pattern represents a valid individual journey, rather than correct or incorrect dying. For those supporting someone through this transition, creating space for authentic expression about death and dying provides essential support. Simple questions like, how are you making sense of what's happening? Or, what thoughts do you have about what comes next? Open conversations that honor the individual's unique perspective. Equally important is respecting when someone chooses not to discuss these matters, recognizing that silence sometimes represents another form of processing. Perhaps most significantly, witnessing someone achieve this acceptance often catalyzes profound growth in those who accompany them. Family members frequently report that participating in a loved one's conscious, accepting death, transformed their own relationship with mortality. By modeling peaceful engagement with life's final transition, the dying person offers a final gift, teaching others how to live fully, even in the face of life's ultimate certainty. As we conclude our exploration of these 8 significant signs that signal life's approaching conclusion, we return to the wisdom embedded in Shi Heng Yi's philosophy, that awareness of mortality enriches our experience of living. These bodily messages, when recognized with compassion rather than fear, provide valuable opportunities for preparation, connection, and meaningful closure. The signs we've discussed: changing sleep patterns, weight loss, diminishing interest in food and drink, social withdrawal, increasing weakness, altered breathing, consciousness changes, and spiritual acceptance, collectively create a roadmap for understanding life's final journey. While individual experiences vary considerably in timing and specific manifestations, the general progression appears with remarkable consistency across cultures and conditions. For seniors experiencing these changes, recognition brings opportunities for conscious participation in their final life transition. For family members, understanding these natural processes reduces unnecessary suffering caused by false hope or aggressive interventions that may increase discomfort without extending meaningful life. For healthcare providers, identifying these patterns allows more accurate prognostication and more appropriate care planning. Perhaps most importantly, familiarity with these natural transitions transforms our cultural relationship with mortality itself. Rather than viewing death exclusively as failure or tragedy, we might recognize it as the necessary completion of life's journey. A passage that, while bringing genuine grief to those left behind, can unfold with dignity, meaning, and even beauty when approached with knowledge and compassion. May this understanding serve not to create fear, but to foster deeper appreciation for life's precious moments, greater compassion for those approaching their transition, and wiser choices about how we spend the time given to each of us, whether that time spans decades yet to come or just days ahead. In the words reflected in Shi Heng Yi's teachings, when we learn how to die, we learn how to live.